So anyway, there's me yesterday complaining that they didn't post the system requirements for the Call of Duty Vanguard yet, even though the game's launching on Friday. And you know what they did today? They posted the official system requirements. Now, my video yesterday was still pretty good, got you a lot of good info, but they do have more information available now, so let's jump in and update things just a little bit. So this is nice. They've given us several different brackets here. They got minimum, recommended, competitive, and then ultra 4K. And I've got some complaints about that, but we'll talk about that in a second. Anyway, they've broken it down by CPU and then RAM, storage specs, high-res asset cache, video card, video memory, and recommended drivers. However, what they don't tell you, other than the Ultra 4K part, is what resolution and settings and frame rate targets these get at. So the good news is there's lots of footage available of specific GPUs and CPUs on YouTube playing the beta, and the beta will give us a very good idea of what the performance of the final game will be like, and possibly the final game would perform better, not worse. Well, at least you would hope, given some optimizations hopefully happening, or at least equal. Anyway, so what do we have here? On the CPU side of things, their minimum is an i3-4340 or an AMD FX 6300. These are very old CPUs, and this is an i3. Now, on the minimum, we have to jump down a bit because of how they formatted this. Their minimum GPU is a GTX 960 or AMD Radeon RX 470. Now, when we're talking about these minimums, let's think about what settings and frame rate are they targeting. So rather than just completely speculate, let's take a look at this. So I found this YouTube video, and I will link everything I use in the description to this video. This is DCX Gaming. Testing out an Intel Core i5-3570. No, that's not the minimum listed, but this is a very old i5. So what do you get on a really old Intel i5? And a GTX 960 2GB on an 8GB RAM system. So this is very much the minimums. And on 1080p at the lowest graphics settings possible, if we go ahead and let this play a bit, you'll notice that it is absolutely not targeting 60 frames per second at 1080p low. So don't think that that's what the minimums are targeting. This appears to more be in the, between 30 and 60. And look, we're even saw that kill cam drop under 30 frames per second. Now, this is both a low-end CPU and GPU, but if you look at the usage here, while the CPU usage is high, this does appear to be a GPU at 100% GPU bottleneck. So this is a GPU limit. So, but the CPU right there getting up into the 90% range. So on this older i5, it's looking like that would also maybe struggle with 60 FPS. So I would say that their minimum targets here are definitely not going for 1080p 60 FPS. This is looking like 30 to 45 FPS is more reasonable on those minimum specs. All right, so let's jump into recommended. They've got the Core i5-2500K, which honestly, we just saw an even newer generation of i5 in this video, right? We saw an even newer, instead of 2500, we're at a 3570. And this one, like I said, was hitting nearly 100% usage when they're not even quite getting to 60 FPS. So I do not think that CPU is going to do it. Now, what I really don't like here is that they're listing the Ryzen 5 1600X next to that, which is a much newer, much faster, and much better CPU. And I think that this one absolutely can handle 60 FPS. And while I didn't pull up the video today, in my video yesterday, I pulled up a video with the 1600X, easily handling over 60 FPS gameplay, so no problem whatsoever there. So again, I don't know why they're listing that in the same tier as this. This one I think will struggle to maintain 60 and will probably be below it in a lot of instances. This one will hit it hands down. Whereas the video card recommendations, we've got a GTX 1060 or Radeon RX 580. Hey, I found a video of somebody testing out the game on a GTX 1060. Here's 1080p at the lowest settings, and you can see it's maintaining well above 60 frames per second. We even see it pass 100 frames per second in easy scenes, drop down to right about 60 in more demanding scenes, but 1080p low settings on the recommended GPU seems to be ooh, wow, we actually do see it dropping into the 40s right there. So it could see some difficulties, but overall, not too bad. Now, if we jump all the way up to 1080p Ultra, this can again depend a lot on what exactly is going on in the map. So on 1080p Ultra, we see, in the 50s, 40s, right? and in between. So it's looking like you can, at least on the low settings and balance it out, get some good settings on the GTX 1060. Now, I actually own a GTX 1060, and I do intend, as long as I have time, to benchmark the game on the GTX 1060 on Friday when it comes out and see how the final performance goes, again, if I have time. All right, now the competitive settings are going up to the RTX 2070, the 3060 Ti, which is better than an RTX 2070, and a Radeon RX 5700 XT, which is fairly close to a 2070. Now, what does this get us in terms of performance? Well, again, looking at the beta, I find somebody here playing at 1440p high/ultra settings, and does appear to be getting above 60 frames per second, drops into the 50s a little bit, but it's looking like this is able to max the game out at 1440p and still probably average around 60, even if you do have some dips a little bit below. Now, that means that if you wanted to drop all the way down to like 1080p high ultra, your frame rates are going to be fantastic. We can see here around 100. Again, it's going to depend on the exact scene. We can jump around, but up in the 80s, 90s. So it's looking like the RTX 2070 is going to handle 1080p easily, and 1440p, you know, it just depends on the settings that you want to use, and if you're targeting a high frame rate or just around 60. Now, if we move on over to the recommended and competitive, the competitive CPUs, we're seeing an i7 8700K or Ryzen 7 1800X. Like I said, I already feel like the 1600X can maintain above 60 FPS, so now it's just really like, how high of a refresh rate do you want? Now, I personally owned and tested the game on an i5 9600K, which is slightly newer here, but stepping down to the i5, and that was easily able to go 100 frames per second or more. So I don't think the 8700K is going to have any issues with that as well. So I think that these are going to be absolutely solid for high refresh rate in the 90-100 frames per second range or above. And I'll have proof of that in just a second as we talk about the Ultra 4K. Now, I don't like that they're still dubbing this 4K as they bump up the CPU requirement, because the CPU requirement doesn't really go up as you go to 4K. Although as far as more high refresh rate 1440p or 1080p, I think these will do fantastic, and even better CPUs, you know, awesome. Like the Ryzen 5000 series would do even better due to its better single core performance, and same things with the 10 or 11 series Intel GPUs. Our RAM's jumping up to 12 gigabyte and or 16 gigabyte if you're wanting to have some ultra settings in there. And again, jumping up to the recommended video card, they have an RTX 3080 or an RX 6800 XT. And I actually myself tested out the beta on, like I said, an i5 9600K and an RX 6800 XT. And I can tell you that I tested it at 4K, and I was able to maintain my frame rate counter here is way too small. But you can see that I'm in the 70s or 80s on this map, and I found that this was one of the worst performing maps for me on this card. And there were other maps where I would easily be, you know, well above that at 4K. And the beta also had some FSR that you could activate, not through the graphic settings in the games, but through their ini file, whatever, right, the configuration file, and that again really helped out. And I believe the final release is supposed to have DLSS if you're on an NVIDIA card. Which is cool. All right, guys, there's the updated version of the video. Hope you found this useful. And like I said, I'm hoping to get some benchmark videos out on a GTX 1060, an RX 6600, and an RX 6800 XT when the game actually launches on Friday. Have an excellent day.